Good day, Internet. My name is Donald Miguel Thomas. Some of you know me as 1989 was born, others as Stealth Mongoose, and I have many other online handles, but enough about my credentials and titles or whatever label I decide to give myself. I am an atheist on the subject in question, and my video is in response to I believe a Mr. Peters Sr., who seems to have responded to one of Edward Tart's notions about the evil nature of God. That would be the deity as portrayed by the Judeo-Christian mythology in Christianity. Now, I'll begin by just taking a look at the general tone of Mr. Peters' video. He seems to begin the video by setting up a premise, flawed or otherwise, that seems to portray that a deity is necessary for the avoidance of suffering within the afterlife. Aside from that, he also seems to assert quite strongly that death coming around the corner is a reason to accept a deity into your heart, in this case the Judeo-Christian God of Jesus Christ. Now, while in some cases I may go at this quite aggressively, I really want to try to tackle this in the right way, so I suppose I'll begin with one of his most simple claims. The idea that we as human beings are inclined to know anything about the afterlife is somewhat of a bad argument. I myself am incapable of acquiring knowledge of what happens to consciousness after death, aside from what the evidence has shown us. Now, to that end, I applaud Mr. Peters for taking the first step in the argument by asserting that he has some knowledge of the afterlife. However, I think that this claim should be analyzed much more carefully than it is at its face value. If we're going to assume that death brings an afterlife whatsoever, then Mr. Peters should be willing and able to provide evidence of that afterlife. Without evidence of that afterlife, the assertion of said afterlife is somewhat of an unfounded argument. Moving on from that, Mr. Peters goes on to state that the entire world that we live in, this marvelous rock with plants and animals growing on it, as well as diseases, natural disasters, and contagions of all kinds, seems to be all the summation and product of his deity of choice. And furthermore, he goes on to assert that this death trap, as he so eloquently puts it, is created by this deity in order to garner faith and worship, so as to acquire some form of salvation from this world after death. Now, while this is an interesting assertion, let's not forget our burdens of proof here. If I assert that someone created the cosmos, I need to be able to provide evidence for said creation. If, for example, we accept that the Judeo-Christian God created the universe, then it stands to reason that that God would leave behind some form of evidence as to its creation. However, this does not appear to be the case. Furthermore, asserting that said God is both the creator of the death trap and the savior from the death trap does not denote an omnibenevolent trait. That is to say that the God that Mr. Peters is asserting is not all good. This, of course, is because in order to be all good, a deity must do naught but good acts. And within the Bible and within the creation of this death trap, as Mr. Peters once again so eloquently puts it, the creation of said death trap is obviously not a good thing. So, when we're talking about a deity that is all good and the savior of everyone, we should analyze what limitations that imposes. For a deity to have to save someone, that means that that deity must be powerless to save everyone. If we're going to assert that there are chosen people of God, then we must also be willing to assert that God cannot save everyone. And if this is the case, then what is the point of the title of God, is what I would assert. Now, there are many notions of God, I understand, from various cultures, creeds, and ethnicities. However, in order for a God to be omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, and so on, no evil should be allowed to happen, and everything within that God's power should be done to prevent said evil. When we have a God, for example, who allows evil to occur in the world, that God is by definition a negligent God, and must be held accountable for the evil that is allowed within the scope of its traits, that being omnibenevolence, omnipresence, and so on. In closing this up, I suppose, since this video has to be roughly 10 minutes long, otherwise YouTube will get angry, the concept of the God that Mr. Peters puts forward seems to have little to no bearing on reality. Now, this isn't outright to say that such a fictional concept can't have inspirational value or whatnot, but when it comes to attempting to guide the morality of others, the Judeo-Christian God, which has proven itself to be a sexist, homophobic bully in many cases, does not seem to be the God that is worth following. Now, that is not to say that any other deities are worth following in the perspective of my own opinion, because, for example, if you take any one of the major religions from anywhere around the world, each of them seems to be an inflated human ego of the followers who contribute to said religion. The god of Buddhism, for example, the heightened state of the Buddha, seems to assert a theological premise of dominance over the cosmos and its many facets. If you believe in the Greek pantheon, many of the deities there are quite selfish and very often provide boons and blessings, but still contain those ever-human flaws, emotions, and illogical and irrational decisions that for some reason they seem to reflect from their creations more than the heightened ascension concept that they are said to embody. Now, in relevance to this whole assertion about requiring salvation from this death trap, I have to say that the world itself does not seem to be as much of a death trap as the Mr. Peters would propose. For one, in the absence of a God, I seem to see much of nature working individually to continue its own survival and to propagate the survival of future generations along its line. I visited a place called Arizona recently. I'm not sure if you've been. It's a state within the United States, and upon visiting the Sonrita Mountains, I had discovered that the entire mountain range had been nearly scorched to ash a year and a half or so ago. Now, upon climbing up the Sonrita Mountains and taking a look around a year and a half later, I observed that the entire place had grown back. Now, in the absence of miracles, we can certainly observe that nature continues to survive. In the end, even after we stop praying and after every religion has been wiped from the face of the earth by some natural disaster or a great cosmic cataclysm, the planet itself seems to continue on. I can close this video in saying that while Mr. Peters' response is quite emotionally charged and aggressive, it does not seem to carry the intellectual weight that is necessary to make an argument substantial, especially to one such as myself. And while this may or may not be a personal taste, one thing is for certain. Once you stop to take a look at the universe around you, you'll find that God is quite simply uninvolved.